Who is the loved one? Allah. Who is Ar-Rahman? Allah. Who is Al-Mannan? La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Muhammad is the messenger, to Allah is our return. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah. Muhammad is the messenger, to Allah is our return. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah.
So just to give you a little bit of background to myself maybe then, my name is Salahuddin Patel. I grew up in London. Like the brother said, I grew up in a Hindu background. My father is from India, Gujarat. My mum, in fact, is from Africa, Uganda, Kampala. And obviously she had to leave when Idi Amin, kicked out all the foreigners in the 70s. So I grew up in London, in the Hindu community. I know there's a Hindu community here, right, in South Africa. And the Hindu community is quite, what you find, they're quite close-knit as a community, so they do things together, essentially. So, just like anyone who's born into any sort of religion, you follow what your parents tell you, right? You believe what your parents to be true, and you want to be good. And alhamdulillah, by the permission of Allah, when I was in my sort of academic years at university, I had good Muslim friends. And they wanted to actually give dawah to a close Christian friend that this brother had that I knew from university, because they grew up together. They were like best friends. So his best friend was a Christian from Jamaican background. So he was trying to give him dawah, give him some materials, and I was there at the same time. And obviously I got the dawah materials. And then when I saw that, I realized, you know what, actually this is something that makes sense. Because growing up in the West, one of the good things about the West is their whole sort of society or methodology or philosophy is based on skepticism, meaning you question everything, right? And it's really helped us, especially in Islam, because now, before you would accept things without even thinking, but by this idea of questioning things, then you can get to certainty, right? If you have the right knowledge. So I began to doubt, these ideas in Hinduism, this idea of anthropomorphism, God coming down as a man, this idea of idol worship. So, in my sort of later teen years, I rejected this as an ideology. But what do most people do? They still, follow their family traditions, even though the theology they will reject. They'll just follow because family tradition. So, I read some books about Islam, and I'm sure I watched, the late Sheikh Ahmed Deedat's videos, rahimahullah, and it made sense, and it was obviously by the permission of Allah. So that was whilst I was at university, but for many years I wasn't a practicing Muslim. And the reason I wasn't a practicing Muslim, because the Islam that was given to me, or my friends, they weren't practicing Muslims. In the West we have a big community of Muslims that are not really practicing. So, when I say not practicing, they would probably go Jummah on a Friday, they'd fast during Ramadan, and that's about it, basically, yeah? Muslim name, obviously, eating halal meat is a big thing, no pork, but pretty much that's the extent of their Islam. So for many years, that's how I was. And I was working in the city, I was working in London, I was working in investment banks, and I thought, you know what, I'm making progress, I want to try and be successful in the world, but I realized something was missing. And then, alhamdulillah, I had a time when I wasn't working, had a time to reflect, time to think about things. And I realized actually, that the Islam that I had accepted, I wasn't actually practicing it, meaning, worshipping Allah. And that's really when I stumbled onto IERA, because it was around about that same time my sister, she accepted Islam many years after me, right? Alhamdulillah, by the permission of Allah. So there's two of us. And because usually the sister's network is better than the brother's network, she had a good group of sisters around her. And one sister, she was working for an organization, and she heard that there was a retreat for new Muslims. So she invited my sister. And this organization was called IERA. It was their first sort of new Muslim retreat. So my sister said, look, why don't we go along and check it out? Because she was invited. So I went, and then that's when I first heard of, IERA, and they helped me with the practice of Islam, and I've been volunteering, and then slowly be involved with the organization. So alhamdulillah, this is all the plan of Allah. And you guys, you know, are working for a great organization. And, you know, my advice is the best tarbiyah you can have in terms of developing is the company that you keep or what you do. So you guys being here with IPCI, this is the best thing for you, especially dawah. You know, as you will see, this is the greatest job in the world. Nothing is greater than the work of Allah. And I'm sure Adnan showed you the ayat from the Quran. There is no one better in speech than the one who invites to Allah righteous deeds and says, I am of the Muslims. If you break that down, the person with the best speech is not a president, not an inventor, is not, you know, Bill Gates or Elon Musk or whoever the presidents of the past. It's a da'i. And you should always remember that. So the importance of this work should always be stressed. And so you are amongst the best of people. And for me, I can definitely say that, you know, the dawah has changed my life. And of course, all of us, we have struggles and tests, and we try to overcome them. But, you know, this is a good environment that you guys have. So let me play the video, inshallah.
Many people say that doing something you love is always going to be a piece of cake. However, what I've realized is that when Allah blesses something, you can have your cake and eat it. I am so proud to be part of an organization which is dedicated to conveying the call by advancing the prophetic mission, which is reconnecting humanity to Allah all around the world.
We've just completed the first 6 months of our operational year, and I'm pleased to say that we now have our fingers in lots of pies. We brought on board 18 outreach specialists from across 6 continents who are serving the compassionate message of Islam across the world.
In the last 6 months, we have delivered outreach training, lectures, community events, and engaged with our stakeholders in over 25 countries. Some of these include Taiwan, India, and the Philippines. In the last 6 months, we achieved what we did in the whole of last year. Do not take this with a pinch of salt. We are committed to this noble cause.
Globally, it hasn't been the best time to be a Muslim. However, there is no point crying over spilt milk. We truly believe in positively engaging with our brothers and sisters in humanity by sharing Islam. The only way forward is to positively engage, elevate and educate.
This is why I'm delighted to tell you that our impact is now felt in over 140 countries. These countries have been directly impacted by our materials, activities and publications.
At home in the UK, we delivered 2 transformative retreats, educating and empowering new Muslims to positively contribute to society. Supporting new Muslims hasn't always been everyone's bread and butter. That's why I'm so proud that we've empowered over 2,000 new Muslims since July.
We also developed and trained leading imams, educators and influentials. As they participated in our educational program, they acquired a holistic understanding of how to share Islam. Our educational intensives are already bearing fruit.
What's my line anyway?
Nothing cheesy, I hope.
In conclusion, the biggest highlights for me were the official launch of Masjid Hanna in Malawi, where we had 86 shahadas and the 215 Filipino villagers becoming Muslim. Our focus is not just people hearing the message of Islam, we are committed to the development of new Muslims. For example, our full-time Imam at Masjid Hanna is currently using the facilities to develop the new Muslims to positively engage with the community and share the beautiful message of Islam. We want to ensure we have no bad apples in our communities. We are taking this responsibility seriously. May Allah reward you for supporting us.
Well done, guys.
You guys get the point, yes? Inshallah. So, alhamdulillah, the organization was started by Sheikh Abdul Rahim Green, Yusuf Chambers, Saqib Sattar in 2008 with the vision of basically creating a mass movement in the dawah, basically having a focus on dawah to non-Muslims. And the idea was through our methodology, which is motivation, education, and outreach activities, we'd be able to create a system that we could replicate across the world. So at the moment, what we've got is we hire, talented duat across the world. We develop them as leaders because we believe that duat are the agents of change. Like the late, Sheikh Ahmed, rahimahullah, he was an agent of change here in South Africa and across the world, right? And that's what we want to develop across all the continents. So we have, international outreach specialists on all 6 continents, and we're looking to expand across in every single country, inshallah. And this is where you guys, Jazakallah khairan. And this is where you guys come in as well, because we believe in collaborating. We've established dawah organizations. We're not here to take over the dawah. We're here to work for the same goal, which is to convey the message of Islam to the whole of humanity, right? To reconnect them to the message of Islam. So, alhamdulillah, you've had a taste of Adnan's training yesterday and a bit of it today. We're going to continue with our basic training, which is the GORAP training, which we believe is an effective way of just conveying an intelligent case for Islam with anyone, regardless of their background, regardless of their level of religiosity, even if they're an academic, you can still use this, inshallah, right? When people go and speak to non-Muslims about Allah, they do a bit of injustice, right? They make Allah into this abstract ideology or theology. They don't really focus on the main thing of dawah, which is to establish a loving relationship with your Creator. That's the deen. Yeah? And the way you're going to do that is by knowing who your Creator is. Now, if you're talking to a non-Muslim and you're just going to say, you know what, God, He is one, He has no beginning, He has no end, He has no children, He has no offspring, and He is not like anything. This is a good start. Right? However, it doesn't do true justice of who Allah is. We have beautiful descriptions of Allah. And if you really want to connect someone, then we need to start sharing these beautiful names. And not just the names, but the impact of these names. So for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most loving. How is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala most loving? A better example you can use is, look, our Lord is so merciful, and the Creator is for everyone, that even if you're a disbeliever, even if you deny God, God still gives you air to breathe. God still gives you water. God still gives you food. God still gives you all of these blessings. What a merciful Creator. Even the one that denies Him, He will still provide for. That is the God that we believe in. Right? So that's an example. So what we need to do is we need to start using these names to better demonstrate and show to the non-Muslims why they need to worship Allah alone, why Allah is deserving of worship. Because using this abstract idea, it's not as powerful as it should be. Of course, everyone is born upon the fitrah, and I'm sure Adnan went through the fitrah diagram, yes? Who can remember the fitrah diagram? With the heart. Who knows? Did Adnan go through that? Oh, he didn't explain much. Okay, let me explain. That's the main part of the Dawah training course. So, alhamdulillah, I'm going to explain it to you, yes? Because this is the core of the methodology. Just wait for the slides to load. But essentially, if you go, I don't know if the slides are in your notes, right? But if you go to the heart, if someone could tell me what page that is on. 30, yeah? So if you go to page 30, right, this is the core methodology of the dawah, and we believe this is the classical methodology employed by all the prophets of Allah. And what are we trying to state here? We're stating here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that every single human being is born upon the fitrah, yes? Natural state to believe in God, right? Everyone is born in this state, regardless of what background or religion that parent is upon. Every single child. And we know that every single soul has testified to this fact, yes? So, if that's true, if everyone is born upon the fitrah, then what happens? Why does a person, why does a person not automatically be a Muslim or accept Islam? And the reason is this fitrah, this natural disposition, it becomes clouded. And it becomes clouded either because of upbringing, because of environment, because of desires, because of different circumstances. The fitrah becomes clouded. It may be a bad experience someone had, yes? So our job as duat is to try and help uncloud that fitrah for our brother and sister in humanity. Because everyone in humanity is related. We are all the descendants of Adam alayhi salam. That makes us all biological brothers and sisters, right? So we are the human race, we are the human family. So it's important to understand that our job is to try and help someone on their journey to get closer to Allah. And it's not just one methodology that you employ. It's not just a rational argument that you demonstrate, or a rational argument to show that Islam is true and that's going to do the trick. No. Human beings are complicated beings. They're emotional. They're irrational. They're irrational before they're rational. And we know this. You can have two different people saying the exact same thing, and the way it's perceived will be interpreted differently because of the person who's saying it. Again, I'll say that again. Two people can be saying the exact same thing, but the way it's perceived and interpreted is dependent upon the way the person perceives the person who's saying it. Right? So it's not just about the information, it's the way how we deliver that information. That's why the characteristics, the manner, this is so important. And this is something that, Adnan covered. But going to the fitrah, these are the techniques that we need to employ that we know are effective. So what's the first comment on that heart? So how can you use the Quran to help uncloud someone's fitrah? So say, for example, we're walking in Durban and, you stumble across a fellow, human being, and he doesn't believe in God, or he doesn't believe in Islam. He doesn't believe that it's true. How can you use the Quran to uncloud his understanding? Because obviously we know he was born as a Muslim. He was born as a soul that believes in Allah, but it's been clouded. So how can you use the Quran to uncloud that? Let me clarify something here, right? Because we've been doing research on this for a number of years, and we've actually upset a lot of people in the dawah when it comes to this, right? That this methodology of using the term scientific miracle is an oxymoron. There's no such thing as scientific miracle, because you have to define the words first. What is science? It's a methodology using empirical evidence to understand the world, right? So if you look at science, it's predominantly based on induction, right? Induction is observing the world, a sample of the world, and then making a theory based upon that observation or subsequent observations. I'll give you an example. We went to observe, let's say, on a farm or somewhere in nature, 100 sheep, right? So our scientific experimentation or observation is to observe 100 sheep. So we're sitting there for a few hours and we count the sheep. Every single sheep that we observe is black till we get to 100. So the data shows all of the sheep are black, right? And that's our scientific experiment. And maybe we go back the next day or after a week and we repeat that same experiment. And again, every single sheep that we see is black. So then we take these set of results and we can make two conclusions. This is what's known as weak induction and strong induction. Weak induction is every single sheep is black. Or strong induction is the next sheep that I will see is going to be black. Two conclusions you can make based upon this scientific experiment. Is that conclusion true? Right? The next sheep may possibly be black, but we know for sure not all sheep are black. So what does this teach us? Science is a methodology to understand the world. And alhamdulillah, we as Muslims, we have a great tradition when it comes to expanding the field of science. However, the early Muslims, they understood what science was and they put it in its place. In fact, one of the earliest scientists, Ibn al-Haytham, he wrote the book on optics, right? He did many scientific experiments. In one of his books, he writes at the beginning, the reason I'm doing this endeavor, or I'm doing science, is so that I can get closer to Allah. I can get closer to God. Not for means to understand how processes work, right? And then to come with a conclusion. So it's important to understand modern day science that you see today is based on the philosophy of philosophical naturalism. What philosophical naturalism teaches is that there must be a naturalistic explanation for everything. So science is pinned under this philosophy, which is philosophical naturalism. Philosophical naturalism states there must be a natural explanation for everything. Meaning they will not entertain the supernatural, only what you can observe. Because observation is based upon what? Your senses. Yes? Your sight, what you hear, what you see, what you taste, what you feel. The 5 senses. That's what science is based on. But the theology, religion, is not based upon these 5 senses. You can't see God. Yes? You can't hear God. Yes? God is beyond these things. So you're using the wrong methodology when you're trying to prove or disprove God. So what should we say as Muslims when it comes to science? Because we should never make the mistake that we deny science, right? And science has really helped us and developed us, and it's a methodology that Allah has given us. It's a gift, but it has its place. So as Muslims, this is our stance, that whatever the Quran says, we believe that this is the benchmark for truth. But what we say is the original intended meaning. A lot of modern day du'at, because we're living in this age of science and technology, they have taken the original meaning of certain ayat and given it a 21st century scientific meaning. But when you go and study the tafsir of that ayat, it was never scientific. So the way we approach this is by saying that the Quran is multi-layered, right? It has multiple meanings and it's timeless. However, we have the original meaning. So when it comes to science, we say we don't deny the science. Even though today, when it comes to the scientific methodology, the Darwinian mechanism for evolution is a scientific fact. We won't dispute that because it's based upon the evidence that we have at the moment. Yes, it's at odds with the Quran. That's not a problem. Because the scientists of the past never had this problem that we face today. For example, 200 years ago, science believed in the steady state model of the universe, which stated what? That the universe is eternal. It has no beginning, it has no end. That's at odds with what we know and what the Quran teaches. Yes? But were the Muslims flipping out saying, oh my God, what are we going to do now? I have doubts in my deen. Because science is saying this. No. They knew science had its limitations. And that's important to understand. So when it comes to using science, yes, we understand science is a means to understanding the truth. However, science is always changing because a future observation can disprove a current theory. That's science. Yes? Because you can never do all of the observations or experiments at the same time. Impossible. So it's always based upon the sample that you have. And you can have a future theory, a future observation that disproves the current theory. And science has always been like that. Right? Science has always changed. So we as Muslims, we don't have a problem with science. However, what the Quran says is the ultimate truth. So when Allah mentions natural phenomena, I would say these are signs by Allah, not to explain how a process works. That's not the end goal. What's the end goal of an ayat? Bring you closer to Allah. The whole idea is when you look at that, it should astonish you and it should lead you to pure gratitude and gratefulness and to show the grandeur of who Allah is. And that will lead you to the submission and worship of Allah. So we must understand that. We shouldn't use this term scientific miracle. That's an oxymoron. A scientific theory cannot be a miracle because it's based on the limited. Right? So there are better ways. So is that clear? Because sometimes, when we explain this, some people get a bit confused. In science, the closest you get to a fact is a theory. Right? So theory is fact in science. Right? And laws are based on that. So we're using scientific language here, yeah? So don't conflate normal English language with scientific, because that's what a person will come up to you and tell you, that this is a fact. What his meaning is a theory. And that's the closest you will have to a fact in science. So the term's correct. Evolution is a scientific fact, because at the moment, this is the evidence that we hold, and this is what the evidence is pointing to. It's not a problem, because the Quran is here. We may or we may not have observation in the future that may bring it in line with the Quran. It may happen. It may not happen. So what? The point is that it's a method to understand the world. You cannot get ultimate truth from a scientific theory, because you cannot do all of the observations. That's the point. Right? So the idea behind this is to empower the Muslims. Right? You shouldn't feel disempowered or have doubts when people come up with these things and tell you, because first understand what the methodology is, understand what science is, right? So that's the point. We've been using this term scientific miracles for far too long, and now it's leading into problems because we didn't really distinguish. It was sort of laziness, to be honest. We didn't really distinguish what science was, and we just jumped on the bandwagon because they look, oh wow, science is showing this. The Quran also showed this, therefore the Quran is true. But that's never the methodology that the classical, scholars and the pioneers and the Sahaba, they never used this technique, So the best techniques are the ones that Allah mentions in the Quran. What are the best arguments Allah uses for the Quran? The Quran doesn't have no contradictions. However, are there books in existence that have no contradictions other than the Quran? Does that mean they're from God? No. A good supporting argument, but there are stronger arguments. So this is known, what we're trying to get to here is what's known as the preservation of the Quran. Right? This is one of the most powerful arguments for the Quran. That the Quran is preserved in its original form, and also that you cannot recreate the Quran. So two arguments here, the linguistic miracle of the Quran and the preservation, right? So two things that are mentioned here, and these are the two strongest arguments. But how can you show that to a non-Muslim? I mean, you're speaking to someone in Durban, he doesn't know Arabic, he's heard nothing of the Quran, and all he knows is the Bible. And you're going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to show you that the Quran is the word of God. It is preserved. The guy goes, okay, prove it. This is something that is important. Now, when we talk about the preservation of the Quran, and a lot of us fall into this trap, especially when speaking to Christians, because the Christians will say, well, we have the Gospels, and they date back to this time, and we have the Greek manuscripts, right? And then they'll tell you, okay, but we have a Quran that dates back to the time of, one of the early leaders, or even the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But the truth is, the preservation of the Quran is not on any written paper. The preservation of the Quran is in the hearts and the minds of men. The memorization. Because what happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Revelation would come to him, right? And then he would tell his people, and they would memorize it. Yes, it was in instances written down and compiled, but the primary means wasn't the written text.